Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere hot. Really hot. Think, scorched desert winds, sun-bleached bricks, and the kind of dry heat that makes your sandals melt to the road. And now picture someone in the middle of all that, saying, you know what, sounds amazing right now. Ice cream. That's the energy we're bringing tonight. You are in ancient Persia somewhere around 500 BCE, re-sweating through linen robes that were not made for hiking across sand. You've got dust in your teeth, a sunburn in progress, and a sudden, ridiculous craving for something cold. And here's the twist. You can actually get it. Because somehow, impossibly, in the middle of one of the world's hottest climates, the ancient Persians figured out how to make snow last all year round. Of course, you probably wouldn't survive this journey between the altitude, sickness, scorpions, and aggressively curious mountain goats. It's not exactly a tourist-friendly path, but that is the magic of tonight's story. You don't have to climb anything. Just close your eyes, stay comfy, and let the history glide by. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where are you listening from. And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in Persepolis, capital of the Achaemenid Empire, where gold-leafed columns reach skyward and the air hums with ceremonial trumpets and sandalwood incense. The year is somewhere around 480 BCE, refined and deeply committed to staying cool in every sense of the word. And despite what you might expect, they're not just fanning themselves with palm fronds and pouring water over marble floors. Yes, they're definitely doing that too. No, what they're especially fond of are frozen desserts. Creamy, sweet, and perfumed with floral syrup. Not exactly the kind of thing you expect to stumble across in a desert climate. Historians still argue whether this Persian ice cream qualifies as true dairy-based gelato or more of a sorbet. Some sources describe an early form of Faluda slushy treat made with vermicelli, rose water, and semi-frozen syrup. Others mention snow packed into decorative bowls and drizzled with grape must or fruit nectar. But whatever the recipe, one thing's clear. It was cold and luxurious, and somehow made without electricity, refrigeration, or a single convenience store. You're standing in the palace kitchens now, marveling at the layers of ceramic jars filled with rose petals, cinnamon bark dried cherries, and strange little green things that look suspiciously like capers but turn out to be crushed pistachios. Somewhere in the corner, a servant is carefully shaving ice from a chunk of packed snow wrapped in camel hide. The room smells like honey and herbs, and just a faint hint of smug technological superiority. Here's the catch. All of that ice. It didn't come from a well-stocked pantry. It came from a mountain. Several weeks ago, a small expedition of laborers and mules hauled wooden crates up into the Zagros Mountains. Where snow clings to the slopes long after spring has toasted the valleys below, they packed the snow by hand, insulated it with straw, and raced it back down to lower elevations. It's a logistical nightmare, an annual tradition. And before you say, that sounds wildly inefficient, remember, this was an empire that built multi-lane highways through enemy territory and planted entire forests just to shade one royal road. They weren't afraid of a little dramatic effort. At the heart of this whole operation was a very specific craving, the craving for contrast. Imagine stepping out of a sandstorm into a shaded courtyard and being handed a bowl of shaved snow perfumed with orange blossom water. It's not just it's a sensory rebellion. Your tongue can't believe it. Your brain starts to your ancestors high-five you across time. Of course, if you're not royalty, you're not getting the fancy version. You might get a handful of snow flavored with pomegranate syrup, passed around in a clay bowl at a wedding, or if you're a lucky child, a small scoop served from a traveling vendor's cart. More on those delightful weirdos later. But for now, just savor the image. The wide stone steps of the palace courtyard, shadows dancing on the walls, and a group of robed nobles sitting very seriously around a tray of what is, essentially, ancient. One contemporary account, though scholars still debate whether it was a later poetic invention, mentions a banquet where ice was served, not just as dessert, but molded into shapes. A frozen lion, a little mountain of saffron-laced flakes with a tiny almond tree carved out of dried fruit on top, or licked carefully. We'll get into how they stored this snow year-round in the next section. But for now, just linger in this strange moment. Ancient world decadence meeting preschool summer vibes. You, reclining on a woven mat, spooning floral ice into your mouth, while someone plays a lute and a servant politely fans away a bee. Outside, the heat presses against the stone walls like an animal trying to get in. But inside, you're cool, collected, and just a little sticky from mulberry syrup. You wake to the sound of hooves crunching on frost. That might sound poetic until you realize it's literal. You're standing at the base of a snowy slope in the Zagros Mountains, and the sun hasn't yet crested the ridge. The air bites, the wind whistles, and your fingers currently wrapped around a coarse leather strap are starting to go numb. Welcome to the snow run. The Achaemenid Empire needed snow, like your modern freezer needs electricity. It was the vital, chilly core of an entire system of luxury and ritual, and that meant someone had to go get it. That someone, today, is you. You lead a small caravan of shaggy goats and 2 long-suffering donkeys, up a switchback trail that snakes through pine-covered ridges. Behind you, a few wooden crates are lashed with rope, lined with straw, and padded with felted wool. They'll carry the treasure back. Snow harvested from mountaintop caches, hidden in shady gullies that haven't seen direct sunlight since early winter. Now, let's clarify something. This isn't casual sledding. Snow harvesting was a carefully timed endeavor, often conducted under the supervision of local officials. Some records suggest entire villages were temporarily conscripted for the task. Historians still argue whether this labor was part of a seasonal tax or a royal tribute. But either way, it meant hauling white meltable treasure across brutal terrain, using only muscle, mules, and a lot of prayer. As you climb, the scent of cedar mixes with cold air so sharp it almost whistles through your teeth. You pass icicles, long as daggers and snowdrifts, crusted over with a glaze of wind-hardened frost. Occasionally, you spot small carved sign symbols etched into stone to mark safe snow-gathering zones. One looks suspiciously like a goat giving a thumbs up. The other might be a warning about snow leopards. You hope not. Finally, you reach the cache, a shadowed dip beneath a rocky out. The snow here is pristine, packed down by previous harvesters, and shielded from the rising sun. You dig carefully, using wide wooden shovels that look more like pizza paddles. The goal isn't speed, it's compression. Snow is layered into crates, each layer tamped down with felt and covered with another dusting of insulating straw. You load the crates, lash them tight, and start the descent. This is the dicey part. Not because of the snow, though slipping is a real concern, but because of timing. The sun is rising, and snow, as you may have heard, is famously not fireproof. Every minute counts. To delay melting, the caravan travels at night or in the cool hours of morning. The crates are shaded with oiled leather tarps, and at some checkpoints, you can swap fresh straw or spritz the exterior with cold spring water. It's the ancient Persian version of dry iceless frosty fog. More anxious go. You pause at a halfway hut, a small stone structure tucked into the hillside. Inside, there's a pit dug into the floor lined with gravel and kept cool by underground water channels. Here, you swap out your crate's padding and maybe grab a bite of salted flatbread and figs. A tiny brazier burns in the corner, but no one gets too close. Heat is the enemy. These runs weren't just logistical marvels, they were dangerous, grueling, and expensive, but they mattered. Snow wasn't a snack, it was a symbol. Bringing it down intact was like delivering a little piece of heaven. There are even ancient reliefs that some scholars believe depict snow haulers receiving ceremonial robes or tiny tokens of honor from local governors. Others argue those scenes probably show tribuberas with amphorae of wine. Tomato though. Good luck explaining either of those. To a Persian courtier in 485 BCE, as your caravan nears the valley, the world transforms. Snow melts from view, replaced by dry grasses and the creaking buzz of cicadas. The crates now ride in cart slows, lung things with wide wooden wheels and awnings stretched across bamboo poles. A few curious children run alongside, pointing at the tarps and whispering about frozen magic. One kid throws a fig at the donkey. The donkey is unimpressed. By the time you reach the outskirts of the city, the crates are sweating slightly, but the contents? Still solid, still cold. You've done it. At the palace gates, guards lift the lids, nod approvingly, and signal your reward. A tall drink of goat's milk, 2 coins, and for some reason a single clove. You're not sure what to do with the clove, but you take it like a champion. Behind the scenes, the snow will be rushed to one of the royal We'll dive into those mysterious mud brick domes in the next section. But for now, just enjoy the journey's end. The crackle of straw underfoot, the low bleat of a tired goat, and the faint, unbelievable knowledge that someone, probably wearing silk slippers, is about to eat snow you personally wrestled down a mountain, and maybe, just maybe, they'll think to themselves, ah, refreshing. And you'll know somewhere deep in your sore muscles and sunburned scalp that you made that moment possible. You follow the snow. Not literally, though part of you would like to, just to make sure it doesn't melt before it gets where it's going. But for now, your aching feet are done climbing mountains. The crates of packed snow, carefully lashed and layered with straw, are whisked through the narrow alleys of the city and delivered to a place both humble and majestic. At first glance, it looks like a giant beehive that forgot its scale. Rounded, tapered, and rising almost absurdly. From the dusty earth, the actual is an architectural riddle. Mud brick and lime mortars, molded by hand into a domed structure tall enough to house a small elephant tiff. That elephant also liked frozen deserts, which, given how weird ancient history gets, is entirely possible. Inside, it's cold. Almost shockingly so. You duck through a low, thick doorway that faces away from the sun. The air shifts instantly. It's quieter here, cooler. The walls are 3 feet thick and packed with insulating materials that make modern drywall seem like a bad joke. Some yakshuls even had underground storage chambers, dug into the hard clay like secret caves for snow. Now, here's the amazing part. These domes weren't just glorified refrigerators. They were fully passive cooling systems. That's right, no electricity, no ice machines, no middle-aged dad yelling that someone left the freezer door open. Just clever design and a stubborn commitment to temperature control. The key was evaporation. Water was sometimes trickled into the structure at night, where it would freeze thanks to radiative cooling, the same reason frost forms on your car windshield. By dawn, thin layers of ice could be collected and stored. Combined with the snow from the mountains, the Actal kept temperatures low enough to preserve perishable food, delicate herbs, and most importantly for our purposes, frozen deserts. Historians still argue whether the Actal originated entirely within Persia, or whether it drew influence from earlier Mesopotamian or even Central Asian cooling systems. Either way, Persia perfected it. These domes weren't just storage units. They were feats of engineering that could maintain ice even in the peak of a 110-degree summer. Imagine that, a bowl of saffron ice, pulled from a clay-lined cellar, served on a scorched afternoon in the palace gardens, all made possible by a building that looks like it should house bees but actually hoards winter like a jealous dragon. You wander deeper inside. The walls are smooth, the scent faintly, earthy mud, lime, maybe even something sweet. Somewhere near the back, a worker is carefully rotating amphary filled with chilled syrup. Another layers fresh straw over a stack of snow bricks. The whole place hums with quiet precision, like a monastic kitchen dedicated entirely to refrigeration. Outside, a long, shaded channel leads toward a nearby Kanadak. The water flows underground, shielded from the sun, moving silently through tunnels carved with nothing more than picks, patience, and a healthy disregard for OSHA regulations. The Kanaits not only provided irrigation for the fields and drinking water for the towns, they also fed the yak, cooling the earth below and ensuring a steady supply of water for freezing. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the quiet genius of this. Stored in an oven of a desert, cooled by tunnels hidden beneath your feet. No wires, no compressors, just designed so good, it's borderline smug. You step back outside. The sun has reached its zenith. The city shimmers in a haze of heat, and the mud brick buildings look like they're slowly melting. And yet, somewhere beneath your sandals, snow sits in perfect stillness, waiting to be spooned into someone's desert bowl. Not everyone had access to the palace's stores, of course. Ice was a class divide, just like glass windows, embroidered sandals, or not having to do your own laundry. But during festivals or royal visits, snow and ice might be distributed more widely, sometimes even handed out at temples or marketplaces to commoners. Imagine lining up in a dusty square with a terracotta cup in hand, waiting for a scoop of citrus-scented snow, while a street musician plays a two-stringed fiddle nearby. And just to keep things fun, there are stories, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, of royals pranking their guests by offering snow-based treats on sweltering days, only to let them melt just out of reach. Whether that's cruel or comedy, we'll leave to your sleepy judgment. Of course, not all Yakshals survived. Time, war, and weather wore many of them down, but a few still stand, cracked but proud. In places like Yazd Island, witnesses to an empire that saw no contradiction in building snowmen in the desert. So the next time your fridge makes that passive-aggressive buzzing sound at 2 a.m., just remember, 2,500 years ago, someone figured out how to do all that without plugging in a thing. Just a dome, a ditch, and the will to chill. You're back above ground now, blinking against the sun, as your eyes adjust from the dim chill of the Yakul. The contrast is wild, like stepping out of a walk-in freezer into a very sandy sauna. And in a sense, that's exactly what you've done. You take a slow walk through the bazaar, where the air smells like spice, sun-dried wool, and occasionally camel. It's here, among stalls of apricots and almonds, that you start to realize just how far snow had to go before it ever became a dessert. Because the next ingredient in your ancient Persian ice cream, syrup, sweet, thick, flavored with whatever rare delicacies could be, Sorstan. Spoiler alert, that was a lot. If snow was the backbone of this operation, then syrup was the soul. You pass jars filled with rosewater and stacks of candied violet petals. There's pomegranate molasses, fig nectar, and something that might be tamarind, but smells suspiciously like fermented date. The sheer variety is dizzying. And that's before you get to the saffron, the red gold dust. More expensive, gram for gram, than some jewelry. Saffron was a game-changer. It turned icy slush into royal delicacy. A few delicate threads steeped in syrup gave the snow an otherworldly glow, like sunshine frozen into dessert. And the flavor, gentle, floral, a little mysterious, like if flowers could hum lullabies. Historians still argue whether the early Persians used honey or grape must as the base for these syrups. Some evidence points to a mixture of both, depending on region, crop yields, and class. What's agreed on, though, is the sheer creativity involved. These weren't just sweets, they were statements. The demand for sweet snow in the empire created a ripple effect. Merchants began importing spices specifically for flavoring frozen treats. Mangoes from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, and dried cherries from regions along the Black Sea all found their way into Persian kitchens. Sometimes boiled down into rich syrup, other times preserved whole in honey and layered into frozen puddings, and this is where things start to feel surprisingly modern. You see, the Persian elite weren't content with simple flavored ice. No, they layered it, they swirled it. They developed methods for combining snow and syrup to get specific textures. Smoothness was key, as was balanced too much syrup and it melted. Too little and it was just crunchy ice. You walk past a household courtyard where two servants are hand-churning a large clay bowl inside a wider one packed with snow and salt. The mixture inside smells like rose and almond. Every few minutes, they scrape down the sides and beat the mixture again. It's laborious, repetitive, and oddly soothing to watch. One of the servants notices you and grins. "Tastes like clouds," he says, holding up a dollop of pale pink fluff on a carved spoon. You believe him? Now, while we can call this early Persian treat ice cream. In the modern sense, no dairy yet involved it. Certainly a close cousin. Some scholars even argue that the Achaemenids invented the earliest known frozen dessert process, predating Roman sorbet and Chinese snow cones by centuries. Others push back, citing fragmentary records and ambiguous translations. Honestly, the only thing certain is that you, right now, are eating snow mixed with saffron syrup under a fig tree, and it's spectacular. There's even evidence that some of these treats were used in ritual offerings. A shallow dish of snow and syrup might be left at a temple altar or shared among priests during the height of summer festivals. The symbolism of coolness, sweetness, and impermanence melting. As it was consumed made the dessert as poetic as it was practical. And in the royal courts, it became theatrical. Guests at banquets were sometimes served snow in ceramic cones, shaped like mountains. The snow was topped with gold leaf or edible flowers. Or, if someone was showing off, a drizzle of chilled wine jelly. And yes, wine jelly was a thing usually made with concentrated grape must, reduced over low heat and allowed to set in cool trays within the yacht. You stop by one such tray now, as a boy lifts the lid on a clay pan, revealing glossy purple cubes wobbling in the light. A cat eyes the tray. You and the cat have something in common. So here you are, surrounded by a culture that didn't just invent snow storage, but turned it into an edible art form. Not just survival in the desert, but elegance, celebration, and maybe, just maybe, a cheeky little brain freeze. As you weave deeper into the marketplace, you pass a vendor grinding pistachios by hand with a stone pestle. The paste is rich and oily, and when mixed with rose water and folded into chilled snow, it becomes something halfway between a sorbet and a frozen nougat. It's called faluda, or something close to eat a name, that will change and mutate over the centuries as it travels across empires. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You duck into a tea stall, where the ceiling is draped with linen for shade. A dusty fan creaks overhead. The vendor hands you a chipped bowl filled with crushed ice and pomegranate syrup. No spoon, you're supposed to sip it. It's tart, cold, and deeply satisfying. You slurp quietly, ignoring the sting on your teeth, and watch as a small group of children run past with sticky fingers and red-stained lips. Summer in the desert, Persian style. The palace kitchens are buzzing. You slip past a line of servants balancing trays, each one heaped with figs, jugs of chilled water, infused with mint and cucumber, and of course grates packed with snow. No one pays you any mind. You're just another pair of sandals scuffing along the polished tile. Tonight, there's a feast. You find your way to the edge of the preparation chamber, where the head cuckoo, frankly, looks like he hadn't slept since the last eclipse, is overseeing what appears to be a complex choreography of dessert assembly. Bowls are filled, stirred, passed, chilled again, and finally garnished with pinches of saffron or slivers of candied citron. It's not chaos, it's ballet with apricots. Tonight's star, a concoction called Sharbati Bey. You watch as pears are simmered gently in rosewater and honey, mashed into a puree, and then slowly mixed into snow. Not too fast, or the snow melts. Not too slow, or it clumps. The result is a velvety, pear-flavored snow pudding served in shallow bowls and topped with a single, dried damask rosebud. As you lean in to inhale the aroma, a young assistant scurries past you with an armful of small brass bells. You blink bells? Turns out, these are for the dessert bearers. When the final sweet course is ready, the bearers will enter the royal hall to the gentle tinkling of bells, because nothing says your dessert has arrived. Like a bit of showmanship and mild theater, you wander toward the banquet hall, where long, low tables are being arranged. Woven reed, mats cover the floor, and embroidered cushions offer support for those lucky enough to be seated. As the sun dips below the horizon, oil lamps are lit, casting a golden glow over the scene. It's warm, perfumed, and distinctly drowsy. Honestly, if you weren't already lying down, you'd want to be. Dessert is served at the end, not chalibat. In Persian tradition, the end of a meal wasn't just about sweets. It was about resetting the body, cleansing the palate, bringing the heat of spiced meats and lentil stews back into balance with cooling, fragrant ice. The philosophy behind it was almost medical. Historians still debate how much of this was rooted in Zoroastrian cosmology, the balance of hot and cold, sweet and bitter, light and dark. Some argue that deserted traditions were influenced more by Greco-Roman medical theory, absorbed during later conquests. Whatever the reason, Persian meals didn't end in a sugar crash. They ended in a cooling sigh. Now you've made it to the serving line. As you look around, you spot the less glamorous side of the operation. Bowls must be cleaned, snow must be kept from melting, and occasionally, the odd bee must be chased off a sticky syrup jar. One servant holds a feather fan and waves it steadily over the top of a dessert tray. More for the drama than the cooling effect, but it's appreciated nonetheless. You re-handed a dish by a kindly woman who winks as she ladles what looks like lemon snow into your bowl and sprinkles it with slivered pistachio. Don't eat it too fast, she warns, or you'll see stars. You nod solemnly, as if this is sacred advice. As you take your first bite, everything slows down. The texture is perfect, just enough crunch to remind you it's ice, just enough softness to let the syrup shine. The lemon is bright, almost effervescent, and the pistachios add a buttery crunch. It's sweet, but not cloying. More of a suggestion of sugar than a full-on attack. A musician strums a soft tune in the background, and the conversation at the tables lowers to a murmur. You spot a nobleman scooping his dessert with the air of someone who absolutely has to make a face after each bite to let everyone know how refined his taste buds are. A young girl to his right giggles and sticks her tongue out into her bowl. You feel seen. And then, a surprise. A second dessert, served only to the inner circle. This one is called majunyak, a kind of early frozen custard made with thickened almond milk, flavored with cardamom, and chilled until it holds its shape. It's more luxurious, more difficult to make, and served in tiny portions as if each spoonful were a jewel. You lean over to catch a glimpse as one dignitary pokes his spoon into the mound. It's pale, pearlescent, and topped with exactly one silver leaf. Excessive? Yes. But when your empire stretches from the Mediterranean to the Indus, you get to be a little extra with your desserts. It's around this time that the palace astrologer walks in, and, unprompted, announces that tonight's moon phase is ideal for digestion and intellectual reflection. No one questions him, partly because he's probably right, and partly because he's already holding his own dessert and looks very pleased with himself. The meal winds down. Guests lean back, rubbing their stomachs. Some sip warm mint tea, others just listen to the gentle music. A few shuffle toward shaded courtyards, where fountains burble and peacocks attempt to look decorative, but mostly just look cranky. You settle against a cushion, letting the last bite of snow melt on your tongue. The lamps flicker. The night is warm, but you're cool, sated, and surrounded by centuries of ingenuity. Also, you could taste winter in the middle of the desert. You weigh core, maybe you never fully slept beneath. A lattice of palm froth, the air scented faintly with jasmine and baked earth. Somewhere nearby, water drips in slow, methodical plinks from a fountain. The palace is still, but your mind is moving, nudged by curiosity. How did the Persians manage to keep their snow supply consistent enough to offer icy desserts night after night? Turns out, this wasn't just a lucky byproduct of a few chilly nights in the mountains. No, the Achaemenid Empire built a literal logistics empire to keep its snow flowing. Part trade, part labor, part infrastructure, and part sheer. Your sandals crunch over gravel as you walk along a shaded garden path toward the outer courtyard, where a group of workers is preparing a fresh shipment of snow. The journey it took to get here, epic. Snow was gathered from high elevations, mountain peaks far to the north, where the Zagros and Elburj ranges hoarded winter well into spring. Young men, often from nomadic tribes, were hired for the seasonal job, hauling packed snow down treacherous slopes in tightly bound bundles wrapped in goatskin or palm matting. They worked in pairs or groups, traveling only at night to avoid melt and heat stroke. Historians still argue whether these snow runners operated more like independent contractors or state-appointed couriers. Some texts suggest payments in barley, others reference royal tokens and early version of a punch card, perhaps. What's clear is that, without these haulers, the whole frozen delicacy industry would have fizzled out before the first scoop. You watch as today's delivery is unpacked. The snow still faintly granular despite the journey is immediately divided, some for use, some to be packed into the octal for storage, and a bit offered ceremonially to the kitchen gada. Cheerful clay figure with an almond for a nose and slightly uneven eyes. Here's where things get especially interesting. You see, to preserve snow and ice, the Persians didn't just rely on the Yakchal's passive cooling. They developed what might be considered one of the world's earliest cold chains. During hot months, layers of snow were packed between straw, ash, or sawdust natural insulators. Thick clay pots were used to reduce air exposure. In some estates, Shallow trenches lined with stone-funneled melting runoff into nearby gardens, creating microclimates where water-loving herbs thrive. Mint and basil owe more to ancient snow preservation than you'd think. You crouch next to a laborer, kneeling by a clay trough. He's carefully mixing crushed snow with a thick fig syrup, testing the viscosity with a wooden paddle. He tells you the goal is to get a swirl pattern when it's poured not too thin, or it vanishes. Not too thick, or it... And then, the big reveal. This batch is going to be loaded onto a mule cart. Destination: a noble estate 3 hours away, where a feast for visiting dignitaries requires a desert course with visible snow. So yes, even in 500 BCE, there were desert divas. As you walk alongside the mule cart, as it rolls out of the city gates, the scale of it all sinks in. Keeping snow intact across miles of dusty terrain meant precise planning. Deliveries were timed to coincide with the coolest part of the day. Routes were shaded where possible. Ice miners rode with fans and spare packing layers to preserve the goods. If that sounds excessive, consider this. In some parts of the empire, snow was taxed. Like silver, the further you travel, the more respect you gain for the logistics at play. One town specializes in crafting the double-walled clay jars used for snow transport. Another, nestled closer to the foothills, grows nothing but the herbs used to flavor snow syrups. It's not just a desert, it's an industry, and it's expanding. You reach a roadside rest station where a scribe is recording this very shipment. He's seated beneath a faded awning, marking quantities and destination names in a ledger made from dried bark pulp. When he sees you watching, he shrugs. They say the Medians used to charge for ice by the fistful, he says. Now the Persians weigh it like grain. You sipped from a cold jug, handed to you by one of the mule handlers. It's flavored with tamarin and myrtle, an odd but refreshing combination. One of the younger workers explains that his father remembers a time when no one but royalty tasted ice. Now, he says, even soldiers get a scoop on festival days. That more than the banners or borders, he insists, is how you know an empire is thriving. The cart rattles on, bound for its destination and bearing a small but powerful symbol of status, the ability to conjure winter, even in the heart of the desert. As the sun begins to dip low again, you glance up toward the mountains. Somewhere up there, fresh snow has fallen or has fallen and is already packed for the next journey. It's strange to think of that frozen white substance as both ephemeral and essential, luxury and lifeline. But here, in this world of sweating workers, creaking carts, and delicately chilled syrups, it makes perfect sense. You pull your shawl tighter around your shoulders. The desert night brings a surprising chill. Somewhere in the distance, a camel snorts, and somewhere even farther away, another bowl of rose-scented ice is about to be served. By the time you make your way back to the city, dusk has begun to fall. The horizon glows in soft oranges and purples, and the scent of bread baking in underground ovens wafts across the alleyways. But tonight, you aren't going to a feast. You're heading to a quieter corner of the Capitala school, of sorts, where young aristocrats are learning the finer points of Persian courtly life. You slip through a garden gate, greeted by the low hum of conversation and the flicker of oil lamps. Here, under an arched portico, a group of students sits cross-legged on patterned mats, their instructor perched on a small wooden stool. Tonight's lesson, the art of offering sherbet. In ancient Persia, sherbet wasn't just a beverage, it was a ritual. Not the fizzy fruit soda you may be imagining either. Persian sherbet was a chilled, often floral drink made by diluting fruit extracts, flower waters, and syrups with snow or cold water. Think rose water and pomegranate, or sour cherry and honey, served in delicate goblets with sprigs of mint or slices of citron. The instructor, a man with the slightly weathered patience of someone who has taught to many children how not to spill things, holds up a silver jug. "What's the first rule?" he asks. The students mumble half-heartedly. "Don't pour with your back to the guest," he sighs. Again, with dignity this time. They repeat the mantra, and you can't help but smile. These tiny etiquette lessons might seem trivial, but in Persian high society, serving cold beverages was a serious business. Historians still debate whether these rituals emerged from religious ideas about cleanliness or simply evolved from earlier nomadic hospitality practices. Some say the precision in how you served sherbet. Others believe it was an extension of Persian diplomatic theater offer, cool refreshment first, then politics. You sit quietly in the shadows, watching as a student carefully pours a tiny amount of quince syrup into a cup, followed by a splash of cold water from a clay jug that has been buried in sand to keep it chilled. He garnishes it with a single violet petal. You're not making a potion, the instructor warns. You're making a first impression. He has a point. In the courts of the Achaemenid kings, it wasn't unusual for entire afternoons to pass under the shade of a veranda. Nobles sipping sherbet and discussing poetry or crop rotations with equal gravitas. Some even carried personal spice pouches to flavor their drinks, just the way they liked early customization, you might say. A soft bell rings, signaling the end of the lesson. The students bow slightly, then begin to clear away their trays. One boy lingers, sniffing a bowl of peach syrup as if it holds some secret. "It smells like my grandmother's garden," he says aloud. The instructor just nods. Then you're learning. You drift into the adjoining courtyard where an older woman tends a small herb garden. She tells you she supplies flavorings to the royal kitchen. Marjoram, lemon balm, and something called Gol Marim Mary's flower, a rare type of Persian hyacinth. "Too strong for tea," she says, "but perfect in snow drinks if you're brave." She invites you to taste a cooling syrup she has been steeping, dried plum with a dash of black lime and just a hint of cinnamon. It's startling at first start, earthy, sweet but undeniably refreshing. You thank her, and she hands you a small sealed jar to take with you. "Pour it over snow," she whispers, "when your dreams get too warm." That night, you find yourself lying beneath a wooden trellis in one of the city's garden villas. The stars above are bright, and the warm breeze smells of cumin and dust. Beside you, a servant has placed a chilled drink on a low table, condensation beating on the outside of the cup. You lift it slowly, sip, and let the coldness trickle down your throat. Persian sherbet wasn't just a way to cool down. It was a kind of alchemy, a transformation of fruit and flower into something ephemeral and restorative. It bridged worlds between nomad and king, soldier and poet, child and diplomat. And you-eyed traveler, from nowhere in particular, have now tasted it. As you drift into drowsiness, you remember a detail from earlier in the day. A whisper among the kitchen staff about a new flavor being something using the crushed petals of night-blooming jasmine mixed with honey-soaked pistachio. You make a mental note to find it tomorrow. Or maybe not. Maybe it's enough to know that somewhere in this city, someone is quietly turning snow into something sublime. The sun rises slowly, warming the stone streets and waking the capital with a gentle hush rather than a clamor. Today, you decide to explore the source of some of those magical flavors you sipped last night. The gardens that fed the Persian Empire's cravings. You find yourself walking through the gates of a paradise-walled garden, so serene that even the birds seem to speak in whispers. The word might sound familiar. It shouldn't. It's where we get paradise. Inside, the garden is an orderly tangle of cultivated beauty. Rows of pomegranate trees, terraced fig groves, fragrant citrus shrubs, and water channels that snake through the grounds like lazy veins. You crouch beside one of these rivulets and dip your fingers in it. It's cool, just barely. That's no accident. These gardens were precision engineered to create small climate bubbles. Underground channels called cannons fed the trees with groundwater collected from far-off hillsides. And while it's not exactly a refrigerator, the resultant shade, humidity, and irrigation meant ingredients for ice creams and sherbets stayed surprisingly fresh. Historians still argue whether these gardens were primarily ornamental or agricultural. Were they temples to royal leisure, or cleverly disguised farms? Probably both. Persian kings liked their symbolism. Neat and layered gardens represented not just abundance, but control over nature itself. You pause under a mulberry tree, watching a gardener hand-feed silkworms with its leaves. Apparently, even the bugs here get a curated diet. What really catches your eye, though, are the jars stacked beside a shaded pavilion. They're sealed with beeswax and marked with delicate ink, labels rose date. Some are pungent with vinegar, others sweet with honey. These are the flavor concentrates, the lifeblood of Persian chilled deserts. A cook appears from the shadows, balancing a tray with 2 cold cups, and a bowl of what looks like snow and apricot jam. "Breakfast," he grins. Technically, the dessert is delicious, but the drink is even better made from boiled quince peel and rose hips, with a touch of mint and just enough snow to give it that silken chill. You try not to slurp, but let's be honest, you slurp a little. He sits down beside you, wiping sweat from his brow. "People think the gardens are about beauty," he says, gesturing to the flowers. "But this, the flavors, the syrups, the scents, that's the real treasure." As you wander deeper into the grounds, you start noticing something strange. Every plant seems to serve a dual purpose. Basil's grown not only for seasoning, but for steeping into cooling tonics. Jujube trees line the walkways. They bear sweet fruit that can be dried, ground, and folded into icy deserts. And those prickly caper bushes, their flowers, believe it or not, were sometimes used to perfume early iterations of frozen wine slush. A gardener offers you a fresh sprig of tarragon to chew. "Cleans the palate," she explains. "Also keeps the ants out of your sandals." The afternoon heat rises slowly, but within the garden, the air remains soft, even drowsy. A trio of musicians begins to play a sleepy tune on flute and harp under a nobleman reclines nearby, sipping what looks like lavender and goat's milk ice cream from a carved alabaster bowl. He doesn't seem interested in conversation, or movement or consciousness, frankly. You sit on a stone bench, belly full of fruit and ice, and try to picture the garden not as it is now, but as it might have been in spring. Workers climbing trees to gather lime blossoms, children racing with clay pots of syrup, women pressing orange peel into sugar by hand. None of this was mechanized, but somehow it all worked. There is a legend, the gardener tells you before you leave, that King Darius once declared a well-made fruit ice more important than military tribute. A cool mouth, he supposedly said, makes a calm ruler. Whether or not it's true, it's oddly believable. Just before dusk, you stumble upon a hidden alcove within the garden. It's ringed with jasmine vines and features a low, circular bench carved with tiny animals, deer, snakes, even what might be a lion with a suspiciously smug grin. At the center is a basin, filled not with water, but with a slush of snow, petals, and what smells like fig wine. This, the gardener explains, is the memory bowl. Guests add a spoonful of their favorite flavor and make a wish, or a complaint, or sometimes just vent about their in-law. You contribute a splash of that Quinsandra's blend and think about how strange it is that something as fleeting as snow could become a form of legacy. The gardener claps his hands. Go, he says. You thank him, stepping back onto the gravel path that leads out of the garden. The sky is pink now, and the lanterns lining the wall flicker to life one by one. The gate swings shut behind you with a soft thunk, and just like that, the paradise disappears, but its coolness lingers on your tongue. Night has fully settled by the time you reach the outer districts of the city, where the air grows quieter, the lanterns fewer, and the buildings a little less grand but no less fascinating. This is where the artisans live. Potters, weavers, metal workers, and yes, ice handlers. You wouldn't think ice handler would be a full-time job in a desert empire, but here you are, trailing behind a man who carries an iron-tipped staff and wears gloves, even in the warm night air. He doesn't talk much, just nods for you to follow. He's part of a guild known as the Actual Keeper Specialists, responsible for retrieving, storing, and distributing snow and ice collected during the winter and preserved underground throughout the year. These men are part magician, part accountant, and part logistics mastermind. The air shifts as you descend into one of their storehouses. At first, it just feels cooler. Then your breath turns visible. The corridor slopes down, deeper and deeper, until the walls glisten with condensation. The ceiling is lined with woven mats soaked in brine to keep the humidity from melting their precious inventory. The room opens into a vaulted chamber, and your guide gestures to a series of pits filled with snow layered between thick mats of straw. This is no ordinary hole in the ground, this is a yakchil, a domed ice house made with heat-resistant mud bricks and genius airflow design. Even in midsummer, it holds snow like a secret. Historians still debate whether the Persians invented this architecture independently or adapted it from earlier Assyrian techniques. What's certain is that by the 5th century BCE, these ice vaults were widespread across the empire, part refrigerator, part marvel. The guide lifts a bundle of straw and reveals the shimmering, compacted ice beneath. Pulled this in January, he says with a wink. Still good. He chips a piece off with a curved blade and offers it to you on a palm leaf. It melts immediately in your mouth. Cold, clean, and astonishingly refreshing. You can't help but marvel. This stuff is older than some of the buildings you've seen today, and yet it still crunches. The actual keepers have their own traditions. There's even a hierarchy. JR handlers haul and pack. Senior ones design the insulation layers and monitor the airflow like obsessive meat. Every vault has a record keeper too. Someone who notes how much snow goes in and when, from where, and who's authorized to receive portions. You pass another room lined with racks of amphare cooling wines, syrups, even medicinal tonics for the royal infirmary. One label reads Wild Apple plus Ashmark. Do not shake, but this isn't all just for kings. The guide explains that common people, too, could buy small quantities of snow during the hotter months, though they'd usually get it in coarse, partially melted form and use it to cool water or rub onto feverish children. A handful for a loaf of bread, he tells you. Fair trade. If your face is boiling, you're startled by a loud hissing sound. Turns out, a pressure vent in the dome ceiling has just released warm air. The room breathes, in a way exhaling its heat while quietly guarding its treasure. There's a kind of religious respect here. These vaults don't feel like storage, they feel like temples. Sacred spaces where heat is held at bay, and ice becomes a thing of reverence. The workers whisper, the footsteps echo, and your fingertips go numb. Before you leave, the guide pulls out a small clay jar from a side compartment. It's sealed with wax and marked only with a faded inscription. For Nushen? From James. He breaks the seal and lifts the lid, releasing the faint scent of elderflower and molasses. This one's old, he says. Then he grins. Tonight, that's you. The flavor is strange and wonderful, deep, smoky, unexpectedly cold. You imagine someone sneaking into this vault 2 decades ago, tucking it away as a favor, a secret, or a bribe. As you step back into the warm night, your breath still fogs in the air from the chill clinging to your clothes. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows confused, maybe, or just an early riser. You realize something curious. Yuvia spent the entire day chasing cold in a land that should have none. And yet here it is, tamed, stored, passed from hand to hand with reverence and routine. In a way, this snow collected by hand, preserved through math and ladled out into bowls and memory is more than dessert. It's an idea, a symbol of how far people will go for a few minutes of cool comfort. And if you're being honest, you'd probably walk even farther for another sip of that elderflower ice. You rise early the next morning because sleep is for people who aren't. Tracing the footsteps of ancient frozen deserts across a desert empire. Today, you're heading out of the city again. This time, toward a place where winter isn't something to store, but something to chase. The mule cart rocks side to side as you leave the gate behind. Your driver, a man with an enormous mustache and an alarming disregard for potholes, cheerfully informs you that the foothills are 2 days away if you walk, but only half a day if your spine can survive the ride. You bounce in silence. Eventually, the land begins to climb, the sand giving way to scrub, the heat traded for wind. You're headed toward the Zagros, cloud-brushing peaks that serve as the Persian Empire's natural ice. It's here, in these snow-covered ridges, that the ice harvest begins each winter. At a remote outpost, you meet a group of workers clad in heavy cloaks. These are the barf barn, or snowbringers, seasonal laborers who hike into the mountains, collect snow by the sackful, and bring it down to the yakshols below. It's grueling, freezing work, punctuated by campfire gossip and the occasional snowball fight that escalates into something vaguely dangerous. Historians still argue whether these snow harvests were formal state projects or more like organized side hustles. There is evidence for both. Government-issued ration slips alongside personal letters, requesting extra snow for a cousin's wedding. One scholar even claims they found a joke scratched into a wall at a snow station that reads, "This is the coldest love I've ever known." During the descent, the sleds take over. Gliding on narrow wooden runners, they snake down winding mountain paths like sleepy ghosts. You ride one too, clutching your sack like a toddler with their first snowman. The wind stings your face, but the thrill of it, the quiet whoosh, the sparkle of snow and the sunlight is oddly intoxicating. At camp that night, there's a celebration. The haul was good. Nobody slipped off a cliff, and someone managed to barter a bottle of mulberry wine from a passing caravan. You sip it slowly by the fire, watching as the older workers wrap the sacks in oiled cloth and bind them tight. Tomorrow, they'll be loaded onto donkeys for the final leg to the city. One of the younger workers, a girl no older than 50. You that her family has been in snow since her grandfather's time. My cousin says I should be a poet instead. She says, but poets don't get to throw snowballs. You ask if she's ever tasted the desserts made from the ice she hauls. She shakes her head. That's city stuff, she says, but I imagine it tastes like this. And she holds out her hand to catch a snowflake on her tongue. In the flickering firelight, it's easy to forget where or when you are. The Zagros Mountains haven't changed much in millennia. The snow still falls. The wind still sings, and the people still climb up to meet it. Back in your tent, the wind whips the canvas, and you pull your blanket tighter. It's cold, but a good cold, a purposeful cold. You fall asleep wondering if there's any corner of this empire that hasn't been touched by the silent ambition of frozen water. And you realize ice cream, at its core, isn't about luxury. It's about effort. About people in boots and gloves hauling chunks of sky down a mountain, so that someone, somewhere, can sit in a garden and taste winter and summer. The work begins before dawn. You join the team as they trudge up the slope, each with a shovel, a rope, and a curious contraption resembling a woven sled. They move in silence, except for one guy humming something suspiciously like the chorus of Careless Whisper in a minor key. You don't question it. At the summit, the snow lies thick and dry. Not the slushy wet mess you get at sea level, but the good kind. Crystalline, scoopable snow with ambition. They carve it out in neat blocks and pack it tightly into wool sacks, layering it with straw like a fragile pastry. The trick, you're told, isn't just collecting it packing it so that it stays compact and unmelted for the entire journey back down. You take a turn with the shovel. It's harder than it looks. Your hands go numb almost instantly, and your attempt at lifting the snow block results in a dramatic flailing that earns you polite applause from the group. You take a bow. The man with the mustache mutters something that you're pretty sure means soft city person. You wake up to the sounds of hooves and rustling straw. The donkey caravan is preparing to leave. The snow blocks, tightly wrapped and meticulously packed, are being loaded onto padded saddles like precious treasure, which, in many ways, they are. Your muscles protest as you clamber onto one of the carts for the journey back down to the warmer lowlands. The descent is slow, methodical. The animals step carefully, guided by handlers who use a combination of gentle tugs and what you assume are affectionate insults. Along the way, the trail is marked by small shelters called barf rest stations, manned by rotating teams. These are halfway houses for snow places where ice is stored temporarily and rewrapped to stay preserved. You stop at one made of stone and thatch, and inside, it smells like cold pine and wet wool. A kettle is boiling in the corner, and the snow team gladly accepts cups of thick, spiced tea. You sip yours and realize there's a hint of rosewater in it. Naturally, these routes Mountain 2 Station, Station 2, vault form an ancient logistics web, and yet, they rarely show up in textbooks. Historians still argue whether the Persian ice supply was an early form of civilian infrastructure or merely an aristocratic indulgence that happened to use labor well. But to the people on this road, it's neither. It's a job, a rhythm, just another piece of the empire's beating heart. After hours of riding through ever warmer terrain, the snow blocks are delivered back into the hands of the Acho keepers you met earlier. There's a brief ceremonial check-in, as if one union is passing a baton to another. They tally the weight, inspect the seals, then nod with that dignified satisfaction only bureaucracy can bring. But the real prize awaits nearby a shaded courtyard bustling with energy and sweet smells. This is where ice becomes dessert. You're ushered toward a series of open-air stalls shaded by canopies, dyed in pale indigo and saffron. Beneath each one, something magical is being stirred. Copper bowls filled with thick, chilled cream, clay jars layered with syrupy dates, mounds of pounded rice flour and shaved ice being folded with spices and herbs. This is the domain of the sherfarsh, or mill-turners, dessert makers who transform snow into something divine. You watch as one prepares faluda, semi-frozen confection made with rice noodles, rose water, lime juice, and, of course, finely shaved snow. He scrapes the snow from a block with a curved blade, then folds it into the mixture with rhythmic scooping motions that look more like music than labor. Has to melt just enough, he says, but never too much. He offers you a bowl. You dip your spoon. The texture is both crunchy and syrupy, like a slushie wearing a velvet robe. The flavors rose, lime, and a faint whisper of cardamom dance across your tongue, in slow procession. And here's the wild part. This isn't a rare novelty. This is street food. Anyone with a few coins can get a bowl. In the capital, even in summer, you are never far from someone selling snow with molasses or mixing ice with mashed pomegranate and honey. You find a quieter corner near a small fountain and sit down to savor a second bowl, this time flavored with muskroot and melon. The man beside you offers a bite of his, flavored with ground almond and saffron. Too much saffron, he warns, and it tastes like shoe polish. You take the risk. It tastes like a golden dream. All around you, people are doing the same. Merchants fanning themselves with account ledgers, teenagers gossiping while trying not to get brain freeze. Even the priests in flowing robes share a dish, solemnly debating whether cinnamon belongs in ice cream. A group of children chase each other with empty bowls, their mouths stained red from mulberry syrup. One slips and falls, a snow treat flying through the air in a tragic arc before landing squarely on a vendor-esque dog. The dog, to its credit, does not object. Here, in this courtyard, the great machinery of the Persian ice trade finds its final form not in luxury halls or banquet feasts, but in ordinary joy. A child cooling her tongue, a baker treating himself after a long shift, a grandmother offering a spoonful to her grandson, while the sun bakes the street just beyond the shade. Historians sometimes dismiss these moments as frivolous. They shouldn't. These are the moments that make an empire feel human, where snow becomes memory, where a frozen thing melts just slowly enough to be savored, and as you lean back against the warm stone wall, belly full of sweetness, the last of your faluda clinging to the spoon, you realize something rather profound. The people of this empire didn't just preserve ice, they preserved delight. Later that evening, still buzzing from your faluda-induced sugar trance, you wander back through the capital's quieter lanes. The heat has mellowed to something warm and golden, like butter left out too long. Families sit outside their homes, fanning themselves lazily. You pass a narrow alley where a street performer juggles dates and somehow works a joke about Babylonian tax codes into his act. The crowd laughs. You have no idea why, but you laugh too. This is where your guide catches up with you. That same fast-talking woman from the Connaught tour, now chewing on a pistachio and grinning like she just remembered a secret. You've seen the sweets, she says. Now come see the real deal. The coldest stuff in the empire. She jerks her thumb over her shoulder. You follow. You're led down a low corridor that opens into a quiet, domed structure. It's not marked on any map. No signs, no grand arches, just a low-key ice archive tucked behind a spice dealer's shop. Inside, it's cold. Proper cold. Not desert breeze cold, not Shadandra canopy cold, but you can see your breath cold. You instinctively wrap your shawl tighter. The walls are stone, thick as a man is tall, and the floor slopes gently downward into darkness. This, your guide explains, is a Sardbia basement ice vault used by the royal kitchens, not just for preservation, but experimentation. What's stored here isn't just snow. It's snow plus science. As you descend, lit only by tiny oil lamps set in niches, you start to notice jars, dozens of them, some frost, others sealed with wax. You crouch beside one and squint at the handwritten label. Coriander custard ice, batch number 9, not for guests. Your guide lifts the lid of another. Licorice rhubarb sorbet. Too sour, but impressive. She offers you a spoonful. You try it. Your mouth folds into itself like a collapsing tent. She laughs. This underground vault is the testing ground for Persia's early frozen culinary experiments. Some scholars believe the cooks here were pushing the boundaries of what snow could do, infusing it with egg, fermented milk, even powdered lentils. Historians still argue whether this was part of an elite court competition, or just a particularly bored chef with too much access to cumin and thyme. One wall is devoted entirely to dairy-based concoctions. It's here you find something very, very close to what we now call ice cream. Churned goat milk, mixed with cooked sugar and chilled over shaved ice in metal bowls. They'd stir the mixture constantly to create a smooth, soft texture before freezing it solid. Your guide hands you another sample. This one's made with date syrup and a hint of saffron. It's creamy, just sweet enough, and has that peculiar, slow-melting mouthfeel that modern gelato brags about. What you're tasting, she says, is 500 years ahead of schedule. You glance around, awestruck. No refrigeration, no electric churn, just gravity-fed canals, careful insulation, and sheer culinary and if that weren't enough, you discover something even stranger in the corner. A stack of clay tablets, with that but clear showing different freezing techniques. One illustrates how to dig a shallow basin, line it with copper, fill it with a sweetened mixture, then surround it with snow and salt to speed the freezing process. It's rudimentary thermodynamics. No one knows who drew these. They're unsigned, uncelebrated, maybe some kitchen apprentice with a knack for doodling, or maybe the empire's first food scientist. Historians still debate just how far the Persians took their cold experiments. Some say they created full recipes for specific temperatures. Others insist they had seasonal menus based on snow quality. One slightly over-caffeinated researcher even claims to have found evidence of a coolness index used to rate snow by mouth. That one's probably a stretch. But then again, you're standing in an ice cave in the middle of a desert empire. Who are you to doubt anything now? Before you leave, your guide gestures to a small alcove at the back. There sits a dusty scroll, opened halfway. On it, a scribbled list of ingredients. Rose water, almond milk, dried fig, barley starch, no instructions. Just a note in the margin. Tastes like moonlight. Make again. You don't say anything. Neither does your guide. You just both stand there, quietly appreciating the ambition of it all. Back in the warm air above, the stars have come out in full force. Pinpricks of icy light against velvet black. You sit on a rooftop, gazing up, your breath still foggy from the vault. Somewhere below, more bowls of sweet ice are being passed around. You're left with the lingering sense that the Persians weren't just preserving snow, they were bottling wonder. Teaching it, tricks. Adding cardamom. The next morning begins with something soft, the sound of fabric brushing against stone, followed by the scrape of a ladle against a metal bowl. You're back in the heart of the city again, walking through a quieter neighborhood where breakfast means a bowl of warm wheat. Of course, you're one of the many early risers standing in line for a frozen treat instead. Yes, you heard that right. Ice for breakfast. You're in one of the oldest quarters of the city, where dawn still smells like bread ovens and sandalwood. But today, you're not here for fresh flat. You're here for sharbatis of gahia, kind of early morning snow drink once considered a health tonic. The vendor, wrapped in a linen scarf and clearly amused by your confusion, hands you a tall glass. Inside, snow, mixed with sour cherry syrup and a hint of vinegar. It wakes you up, he says, like being slapped with a rose. He's not wrong. The tartness zings your taste buds awake, while the snow melts across your tongue like morning fog rolling off a rooftop. You sit under a fig tree and sip while watching the city's stir-fruit sellers opening crates. Students yawning through school prayers. A cat pawing at a water jug for attention. According to some ancient texts, these morning snow drinks were believed to balance your humor-schooled excess heat from the night. Realign your stomach before a day of lentils and debate. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were rooted in Zoroastrian dietary codes, or just clever marketing from snow peddlers with leftover product. Either way, it works. You're refreshed and a little bit delighted. As you wander on, you realize the Empire's obsession with cold isn't just technological, it's philosophical. In Zoroastrianism, heat and cold were often seen as cosmic opposites. Fire was sacred, but so was the balance it required. Cooling things down wasn't just practical, it was holy. A kind of purification. You pass a temple garden where the priest is sipping his own icy concoction, while whispering chants to a row of bright marigolds. A bowl of chilled milk sits nearby, presumably not for the marigolds. You consider this deeply. Then you trip on a route and dump the last of your sour cherry snow into your sandal. Cosmic balance. Indeed. Later, you find yourself near one of the Empire's many public gathering houses. These aren't marketplaces exactly, but a hybrid of tea house, library, and semi-legal nap zone. Inside, men and women recline on cushions, sipping slowly from shallow bowls of a cloudy liquid that smells faintly of cucumber and honey. You're invited to join. This is Sikanjaban Barfi, a snow-cooled drink made from vinegar, mint, and cane sugar. Some versions have slices of fruit floating in them like lazy planets. Yours has cucumber and crushed almond. You sip and listen to a gentle debate about how best to insulate a Yakil dome during a heat wave. One man swears by camel wool, another claims you can't beat mulberry bark, a third suggests prayer. No one seems in a hurry to win. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the reach of it all, how snow, hauled from a mountain and preserved through genius and grit ends up in morning drinks, evening deserts, and temple rituals. How many people had to coordinate just for this single sip to exist? The farmers who tilled the sugarcane, the minas who carved the clay, the snow haulers, bricklayers, sherbetsmiths, and board royal taste, the women who mixed the first batches in copper bowls, the children who sneaked handfuls when no one was looking, all for a fleeting luxury. And yet, not so fleeting. You're enjoying it, centuries later. Before you leave the gathering house, you re-handed a tiny wax tablet engraved with a recipe just in case you'd like to make your own sakanjabin someday. The instructions are vague, filled with poetic phrases like a thumb of syrup, and stir until it smiles. You tuck it into your bag, knowing full well you'll never get the proportions right, but the memory will always taste perfect. On your way out, a boy runs past, holding a block of ice above his head like a trophy. He's laughing, triumphant, trailed by two girls with scoops and cups. They're not selling it, they're just playing. The snow falls, melts, returns again. The empire breathes in, then out. Cold, then heat, then cold again. By midday, you find yourself in the outskirts of the city, where the urban buzz softens into a patchwork of gardens. Open courtyards, and private estates with walls high enough to block out politics and most neighborhood gossip. It's hotter, here less breeze, more bees. The kind of dry stick-to-your-elbows heat that makes you dream of shade before you even step outside. But you're not just here for shade. You're here to learn how the elite cooled everything from bathhouses to banquets, with techniques that put modern patio misters to shame. You arrive at a sprawling estate said to belong to one of the royal engineers. At least, that's what your new guide tells you. He appears from nowhere, wearing a sun hat large enough to double as a tent, and begins his tour with zero introduction. "Observe," he says, flinging open a wooden gate, the whispering courtyard. Inside, it's 20 degrees cooler. Seriously, the walls are lined with polished plaster, and the floor is sunken slightly, forming a shallow pool where pomegranate blossoms drift lazily like red punctuation marks. Above, clever openings funnel wind downward. The air isn't just moving, it's performing. He waves a hand. And geometry. This is your first up close. Look at the Begirtal, open towers, designed to snatch the faintest breeze from the sky and funnel it downward into living spaces. They're like giant, elegant periscopes, except instead of showing you the horizon, they cool your feet. These aren't just decorative, they're serious infrastructure. Inside the tower, air is channeled through brick-lined shafts, sometimes moistened with dampened cloth or rooted past fountains to increase chill. The courtyard is a full-on thermal engineering lab. If thermal labs included reclining pillows and trays of candied walnuts, even the plants are part of the system. Shade from trellised grapes, moisture from small water features, and this is real fig trees, specifically planted to perfume the breeze. Historians still debate whether these wind catchers were borrowed from earlier Mesopotamian designs or uniquely Persian innovations. Either way, they're spectacular and suspiciously effective. You step inside one of the estate's main rooms. It's cavernous and gently lit, with a domed ceiling and clay floors. This, your guide announces, was the summer dining hall. Notice anything you do? The far wall has small shelves built into it. On each sits a clay jar wide-mouthed, water-filled, and wrapped in linen. Some are nestled in basins of snow. These, he says, patting one like a loyal cat, Arzirex keeps things cold without spoiling the taste. Even some wine, when no one's looking. You nod, sipping cautiously from a goblet offered by an estate servant. It tastes like chilled mulberries and ... Is that a hint of anise? Either way, it's enough to make you forget the heat clinging to the outside world. As you wander further, you discover the real luxury wasn't just the cold itself, it was the illusion of effortlessness. Wealthy households employed teams of cold specialists, snow stirrers, sherbet mixers, portable These weren't just kitchen hands, they were part stage magician, part climate consultant. One illustrated scroll hanging by the bathing area even depicts a summer evening banquet. In it, a server walks around the table with a shallow dish of snow, gently blowing on it to spread cool mist. Another carries an incense burner filled not with smoke, but crushed mint leaves chilled over ice. Your guide taps the image. They called this borrowing winter, romantic. It is in a who's got time for this kind of way. There's more. Under the estate is a subterranean hammama bathhouse with separate chambers for warm and cold treatments. The cold room features a domed ceiling inlaid with star-shaped openings, letting in only a little light but plenty of ventilation. Snow from the nearby Yakto is brought in, crushed, and stored in shallow bowls. Patrons would rub it across their arms or splash it over their faces before plunging into a mildly warm pool. It sounds brutal, but remember it's 107 degrees outside, and there's no Netflix. Historians still discuss whether this ritual was purely about physical cooling or had some spiritual undertones, perhaps even mimicking seasonal cycles as a metaphor for inner renewal. One scroll describes it as meeting the cold to remember yourself, which honestly sounds like a tagline for a spa that charges $300 an hour. Back in the main hall, you overhear a group of guests discussing the latest yakshow competition hosted by the local governor. Apparently, teams were judged on the clarity of their ice, the creativity of their flavor infusions, and get this, the poetic name of their final product. One winning entry, Snow Upon the Lips of Dusk. You have to hand it to them. That's some serious branding. Before you go, your guide offers you a final refreshment, a frozen melon, half hollowed and filled with rosewater slush, topped with crushed pistachios. You take a bite. It tastes like sweet, botanical snow, crisp and fragrant, like the last breath of spring before summer takes over entirely. You sit under an arched colonnade, your feet dangling into a basin of cold water, your dessert melting ever so slowly in your bowl. All around you, the tricks of temperature to silence sweep of air, the hidden snow, the glint of water under stone continue, doing their jobs, unnoticed, but essential. Somewhere nearby, a child giggles as a drop of water from the ceiling lands directly on her forehead. She's not even mad. Afternoon leans into dusk now, and the city begins to glow. Not with electric lights. Those are centuries away, but with lanterns, lit from wicks dipped in sesame oil, hanging like sleepy stars from archways and rooftops. The air has softened a little. The worst of the heat is past. But even now, ice is working behind the scenes, silently easing the weight of the day. You find yourself walking toward the royal district, led by the scent of saffron and rosewater, drawn by the echo of music bouncing off stucco and brick. This is where the real show happens. Persian, Kolda's performance. Tonight's entertainment is hosted in a garden pavilion called a bagyak, which literally means ice garden. It's not made of ice, sadly, but the name hints at its reputation. Inside, servants move like ghosts, placing frozen treats on trays in intricate spirals. The floor is tiled in cool stone. The ceiling is a tapestry of blue and gold, and on every table, a bowl of snow melts slowly beside a candle, casting trembling shadows. You're not quite sure what to do, so you sit. A server offers you a small dish containing what looks like noodles. You hesitate. Then remember, this is Persia, things are rarely what they seem. It's faluda, thin strands of starch noodles, frozen in a semi-solid syrup of lime juice and rosewater, topped with sour cherry drizzle and a sprinkle of crushed ice. You take a bite. It's cold, floral, and somehow both crunchy and slippery, like eating a poetic metaphor. You're still savoring it when a storyteller begins her tale. No stage, no microphone, just her, seated on a rug, voice low and rhythmic. She speaks of a mountain spirit who taught humans how to preserve winter in clay, of a village where the first yakshow cracked and froze the river for a year. Her voice is slow, hypnotic. The words settle around you like snowflakes. Historians still debate the accuracy of these stories, whether they reflect literal memory or evolved folk tales meant to explain the marvel of man-made cold, but under the spell of candlelight and mint steam. Does it even matter? Someone passes you a cup of Sharbati Golab chilled rosewater and sugar syrup, infused with basil seeds that wiggle like tiny jellyfish. It's mildly strange, mildly perfect. Across the pavilion, musicians pluck gently at a santer, a hammered dulcimer that sends silver notes drifting into the night. You're not alone in your... Around you, everyone seems lulled into a shared stillness. For a few moments, no one talks. Even the servants slowed down, watching the flicker of lanterns reflected in shallow bowls of melting snow. The celebration isn't flashy, but there is something reverent about it, a quiet joy at having bested the sun for at least a little while. The real triumph of Persian ice isn't just the technology or even the taste. It's the pause it creates. The breath between the heat, a whisper of winter in the heart of summer. You lean back, full of strange deserts and stranger stories. You imagine the vast network behind all this, the ice pits dug by hand, the mountains scaled with ropes, and sleds the domes repaired after each rainstorm. The engineers who dream geometry into air conditioning. You've seen where the snow begins, where it rests, and now where it ends. Not just in your bowl, but in your body. Your core feels cool. Your limbs heavy, your thoughts fogged with sweetness and wind. One of the musicians begins a final song. You can't understand the lyrics, but it doesn't matter. They sound like snowfall, the kind that blankets a noisy world in silence. You close your eyes, and just before you drift off, someone whispers, "Do you want one more scoop?" You smile. It's time to let go. Let the stories settle like snow upon the rooftops of your thoughts. Let the act-shell dome fade gently behind your closed eyelids. Smooth and perfect against a twilight sky. The camels have stopped walking. The sherbet sellers have packed away their ladles. And the mountains? They'll sleep too, under a hush of stars and frost. Breathe in, slow and steady, like cold air slipping down a windcatcher shaft. Breathe out, like rose water melting into a bowl of crushed ice. There's nothing else you need to do, nothing to remember, nothing to plan. Just let the quiet hum of this ancient empire wrap around you like a linen shawl, cool to the touch, comforting to the soul. The ice has done its work. The warmth of the day has been gently folded into slumber. Your journey is complete from the high peaks where snow was harvested, to the shaded courtyards where it soothed sunburned skin, to the final bowl of sweet, frozen Faluda melting beside a flame. You were there. And now you're here. Let your breath match the rhythm of a distant santor. Let your thoughts become snowflakes slow, soft, and impossible to hold. Sleep well. You've earned it.